So today we're talking about what's your story. We're going to learn the essentials of business storytelling. I'm sure you cannot go anywhere today. You see this word and this buzzword is trending everywhere, business storytelling. So what is it? Why is it so important? And we've got with us Anjana Menon and we've got Audrey Buckner, who have both written this beautiful book, which is called What's Your Story? And what's so interesting about it is because they don't only focus on the verbal aspect or just telling stories, but also the digital aspect of it, which has become incredibly important in this day and age. So they tempted me and I said, you know what, I must, as if I'm opening the session, tell my story. So this is my go at it. Let's see how my elevator pitch does today. So my story, I'm Sukirti Gupta. I'm the co-founder of Sipping Thoughts. This is my fourth startup. I'm a late age mom and have twin daughters. I married a guy, and because of which this is all possible to do. I moved to India 14 years ago and have enjoyed every minute. I'm in my 50s and I feel that this is the best phase of my life. As this is a business storytelling session, I have over 25 plus years of experience in varied roles in big companies and small companies, but I am most proud of my ability to introduce new products into the market. So that was me. So now, yay, I know. But in a world where people send 500 million tweets a day, 500 million, imagine how much action is going on LinkedIn, Instagram, and hundreds of millions of hours of video are being uploaded. How do you get your message across? And really that secret is to become a good storyteller. So in this book, what both Anjana and Audrey have focused on is easy to follow effective tools and tips. And even in this session, they will help you cut through the clutter and plan what are your communication goals, what should be your channels, and how should you think about your delivery. We all love a good story, but very few of us, even me, 25 plus years of experience, it's very difficult to do. So today we're going to learn how to be an authentic, authoritative, and how we can be heard. So we're very excited in this session. We're partnering with The Star and Me. We've got Mahua here, which is a global career advancement platform for 8,000 plus women. And it has a lot of talent from 65 plus countries. And it's a diversity partner for 20 plus multinational enterprises who are keen to amplify their potential for diversity. I think a lot of you know Anjana. She's the co-author of this book, and this book has really become a bestseller. What's Your Story? She's also the founder of the CEO of Content Pixies, a columnist for The Economic Times, and the founder editor of Mint. In her former role, she is an award-winning journalist who worked with Bloomberg News in London, co-founded Mint, India's second largest business paper, and ran a TV newsroom, which taught her the power of multi-formats of communication. Audrey Buckner is also the co-author of this book, which is this bestseller. She's an editor and content strategist. She specializes in content production, PR strategy and planning, crisis communication, publications, and branding. So that was a lot, and I said it all in one breath. So over to you, Mahua. I want to hear your story.
Thank you, Sukirti. I think amazing. You did a great elevator pitch, and we have Anjana and Adri here that all of us are waiting to hear from. I'll keep my story quick, and I'm not prepped. My name is Mahua Mukherjee. I'm currently the co-founder of The Star and Me, a global career advancement platform. I got into the entrepreneurial journey after 18 years of my corporate career. So it was late because most of the times you see when you have to start your entrepreneurial journey, it has to be in your early 20s with a backpack. I'm not one of them, but really felt the need of doing it because for me, the why was very important, why I was doing what I was doing. So it all started with a story that I'll leave you with is when me and my co-founder, we used to go for leadership summits in consulting. We used to see leaders all around, but none of them were women. And we used to feel quite alone over there. And that's when our inspiration started. And that was all the way the Star and Me kicked in, that we want to see more women in the leadership positions in the corporate world. And there's no reason why it should not happen. And I think once we decided, all the strings started getting pulled in. But I leave my story here. We'll talk about it sometime later. Waiting to hear Adri, you and Anjana. Have a lot of questions, but let's get started with your story. So maybe Anjana, you want to get started with your story, followed by Adri.
Okay, I think, I've got very little left to say because Sukirti so beautifully introduced me and Audrey. I'd also like to say Mary Beth, who's our other author, she's not here today. So it's actually a book that's been written by the three of us, not just Audrey and me. She's also an integral part. Unfortunately, she isn't here today, but she sends everyone her best wishes, and hopefully sometime soon, we can all do a session with her as well. So my story really is that I've been chasing stories all around the globe. I've moved countries, I've moved continents, cities at really short notice for the love of storytelling. I've worked in multiple regions in Southeast Asia, in Asia, in Europe. And I came back to India a few years ago to be one of the founder editors of Mint. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I got into storytelling again by starting my own firm, which is a content strategy firm. And we produce original content called Content Pixies. And it's the same story again. I'm just running around telling stories for companies all around the globe. So I think I'm just running around in circles, and the center of that is storytelling, which culminates with this book.
Awesome. We always have grown hearing Once Upon a Time. So it's so nice to see the business storytelling part of the world. Adri, what's yours? Thank you, Anjana.
Well, thank you to all of you. All these stories are quite inspiring, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I have always loved words, languages, and people, and the mixes that we can create by talking to people, getting to know them, and telling their stories. So I prefer to tell other people's stories than my own. But the love for words and cultures and languages and people has taken me to 7 countries. I'm now living in my 7th country, and I've learned the languages of each country that I've lived in, which doesn't equal 7, but it's just 5. I did my storytelling at several organizations, nonprofits and corporates, and now I have my own consultancy, which is called Explorers, for that exact reason. And I produce content and advise people on how to tell their stories, either on a personal branding level or on a corporate or nonprofit level.
Wow.
And I'm glad to be here today.
Fantastic. So, Kirti, over to you.
I know we have a very quiet audience. I want to hear from all of you. I mean, how many of you have heard this buzzword, intrigued by the buzzword, have started thinking about how are you going to kind of create these stories in your day-to-day life? But I want to ask this question, and this is one because honestly, maybe ever since I've heard the word and seen the word, I'm seeing it popping up everywhere. Why is storytelling becoming so important? Is it the new buzzword? Is it becoming overused like mindfulness? Everything now is about storytelling.
Of course, people say storytelling is a buzzword, but if you think about it, step back for a minute, almost all of us have grown up on storytelling. Stories have been told to us since we were children. They were told to our parents. They were told to our grandparents. We know stories about cultures which are very different from our own. One of my favorite examples is the Newton example. If you ask anyone, what's the formula? And I think I'm going to ask the audience and see in the chat box if anyone can actually give me the actual formula. Type, the formula for the gravity formula. No one will remember that, or very few will. I'm sure there'll be some really smart people who do have great memory. But if I sort of say, does anyone remember the story about Newton and the apple? Almost everyone will raise their hand and say yes. And I hope people are in the chat.
Yeah, Claudia actually put it right in the same time as you were speaking.
So we know that she's the genius here. Okay, great. But, the apple story has traveled. It's traveled over years. It's staying with us, and it will continue to stay with us. So that in some ways is the power of storytelling. It's always been there. What is different now is there is such an explosion of mediums, and there is no, there isn't really the kind of entry barrier that was there maybe 40 or 50 years ago when we thought storytelling, or even 20 years ago, storytelling was what traditional media organizations did, or a TV channel did, or a radio medium did. You can tell your own stories using a device now, a smartphone, right? It can be, you can be a 5-year-old who's got a following of a few million. You can be a 90-year-old grandma who just decides, well, I want to express myself. So I think what's important is people have come to recognize that they are able to express themselves, and there is an audience for that expression. And those are the micro stories they're telling. But the stories per se have always been around, and they will always be there, because when we hear stories, we're able to connect emotionally, and you're also able to think visually. And I think those are the two things that helps the brain retain a piece of information easier.
Wow, very, very nice. Now I know I want to hear what are people's favorite stories, but I'm going to ask you what makes a good story, and then we'll get into what you're waiting for. I'm going to turn it over to the ladies, and they're going to give us lots of tips. But what makes a good story?
Well, we're going to give you that in our tips and tell you how to start. But I think if to reduce it to one sentence, of what makes a good story is to put yourself in, put a people in, not products, not companies. People want to know that the personal, that doesn't have to be intimate, but they want to connect with you as people. And when it comes down to it, that's not too hard. That's what we do every day with our friends and family. We just have to learn how to do it with different audiences.
Fantastic. So nicely said. I'm waiting to hear what are people's favorite stories, but go ahead. At the same time, we can start understanding what are some of these tips that can help us create great stories.
I'll start with a tip about what I just mentioned, which is audience. One thing to start with is when you want to talk about yourself, your company, your products, your background, whatever the story is that you want to tell, which is another question, exactly what is that story? But first, you need to know who you're talking to. So right now I'm talking to a lovely group of women I can see on the screen, and lots of participants from across your listeners, readership, and viewers. And I need to know what do they need to know? What will appeal to them about my story? So for example, I don't want to use the jargon of technology with this group. I don't want to talk about some medical history or something that might not appeal to this audience. I have to target what I'm saying and make sure that I'm expressing it in a way that can connect with the particular audience. And I think Anjana has some more to say about how to determine who your audience is.
Yeah, so I taking off from what Audrey said, I think the location of the audience is also important. Now, for example, I think this is being streamed on Facebook. You can get it on YouTube. You can get it on Instagram. But we know that the audience, you may not have an audience which consumes all three platforms. A certain demographic uses a certain platform more. So if you want to do storytelling to your audience, the first thing to find out is, this is an easy way to remember it. Location, location, location. Where is your audience sitting? And sometimes that audience may not be on the popular social media channels, because we're so wrapped up in social media. We forget that you could actually have an audience that is there only for events, or is geared towards, say, a scientific journal or a book, or in a forum where industry leaders speak. It could be a community forum. It could be a community chat group. Your entire audience might be on Reddit, for example. So the important thing is to find out the location of your audience, and then try and see how you can build your message in that location. And not get caught up in, I've got to be on social media, I've got to be here, and I've got to be there. You have to be where your audience is.
Very good. So location, location, location. Awesome. What's the next one? Because I think we do get caught up in it, especially as companies, because I think the pressure is on to be on every single social media. And they're expanding. You want to be on Twitter, you want to be on LinkedIn, you want to be everywhere.
Yeah,
so
we've actually, sorry.
Go ahead. So is it okay for companies to be selective? Because from a personal point of view, it's a different decision, and it's a different decision from a corporate point of view.
Yes, it is. It is not just okay. I think it's important to be selective, because at the end of the day, you have a fixed marketing budget. Now, whether you are an individual who wants to build a brand, or you're a company, you have a finite marketing budget, and you also want to see what the returns on that are when you deploy, your money. So there's no point spreading yourself thin in all mediums, especially wasting time, trying to build your message if your audience is not on that platform. So we always advise companies, go where your audience is and build your message consistently where your audience is. Engage with your audience there rather than trying to scramble and find where your audience is. And, throwing something on the wall and hoping it will stick is not a good strategy.
That brings me to another point, that the message needs to be tailored to these platforms. Is that maybe some of you have experienced that friends of yours or even companies have an Instagram account and they post the same thing, and then you can click, say, post to Facebook. And it's so frustrating to see the exact same content on both of those channels. In your personal branding efforts and in corporate branding efforts and messaging, you need to tailor exactly what you're saying to each medium, and in order to reach those the people on that particular platform. So in addition to choosing your platform, even if you decide to be on all of them, then don't forget, it's a lot of work to make sure that you've got a tweet when a tweet is correct, a LinkedIn post when LinkedIn is the community you want to reach, a nice photo for Instagram, or a Facebook Live event for that audience. And that wasn't even one of the tips I was planning on saying.
So, the other thing that we always sort of tell people and companies is, of course, there is a format, but there is also something really critical nowadays, which is attention span. We're living in such an instant age, right? Instant is no longer about instant coffee. It's about instant information. It's about instant news. You have TikTok influencers. I mean, how long is a TikTok video? You've got Instagram Reels, who are influencers with millions of followers, and a lot of companies are using them for brand endorsement or for getting their messages across. So what is the attention span of your audience? Is it a younger audience with a shorter attention span? Is it an older audience that actually doesn't want information in 2 minutes, but wants, say, for example, an article on Substack or Medium and wants to read an in-depth investigative story or deep dive into a particular topic? So identify what the attention span of your audience is, which you will probably get by, you will be able to see the metrics, what is the bounce rate, how long are they staying, and tailor your content to that length. We have this favorite thing where companies often come and say, we'd like a corporate video. And they'll always say, how about 8 to 10 minutes? Actually, the best length is within 2 minutes, because people really don't stay for 8 to 10 minutes. A short feature film is around 15 minutes. A short documentary is 15 to 20 minutes. So that's not a company promo length. So length is really important as well.
I could also add that, about speaking of attention span, that the headline is crucial. There was some, maybe some of you are aware of this story, that in 2016, a scientific website put out a story saying 70% of Facebook users only read the headline before sharing the content. And then it was shared by 46,000 people, which in 2016 was a lot of people. Now it would have been millions. The funny thing is that there was no content. So the people reading that headline, 70% of Facebook users only read the headline, had done exactly that. They'd read only the headline and shared it 46,000 times. It had gibberish afterwards. Well, it wasn't gibberish, it was Latin, but gibberish to most of it. And so that's one reason the headline is so key, is not just because you want people to click on it and read on, but because it might be the only information they take away from whatever you're saying. So before I talk about the characteristics of a good headline, I have the book here, and I'd like to read you some not so great examples, which are by real journalists published in real publications. A nuclear explosion would be a disaster. The World Bank says the poor need more money. Canadian book buying habits haven't changed much. So these headlines, I call them facepalm headlines, because you go, no, that's not what people want to read. So here are some tips to write a good headline. And when I say headline, I'm not talking about the headline of a news story that you're writing, or even a headline of a blog post necessarily, although those are of course headlines. When you think about headlines, you can think about the subject line of an email, or a Twitter post, a tweet, or a Facebook post. This is where you've got to grab the attention of your audience. So be brief, use a verb, and that verb should not be or announce. It should be something engaging. And one thing that that we've done with our book is to ask a question and then go ahead and answer it. What's your story? So that's why we chose we thought it would draw in the reader to have a question. So those are some quick tips on how to write headlines, or short social media posts, or even email subject lines. Anjana?
Well, one of the things that we get asked a lot is, how do I make it memorable? And one of the easy ways to make it memorable is to start with an anecdote, because people remember anecdotes better. So you could sort of reel off a statistic, or you could reel off a quality, but you could make it into an anecdote. And I want to talk about this anecdote, which was passed on to me. Someone who's, CEO, CXO, called me after the book was released, and he said, "I'm so glad you wrote the book, because I always explain my situation through stories." And he said that when he was a child, he grew up in a very frugal household, and he had 2 siblings, and they were in a constant state of want. But the only thing that they were never refused, or they had plenty of, was food. So apparently his mother always said to him, "The food is in the kitchen. You can go and you can help yourself to as many helpings as you want. You want to serve yourself 4 times or 5 times. The food is there for you to eat, but never waste a grain." And he said that was how he grew up. And when he got the chance to run a company, he ran the company like that, with 0 wastage. Now, he could either tell an audience, "I'm a CEO who runs my company with 0 wastage," or he could get this across through an anecdote. And I think I heard that anecdote sometime back, a couple of months ago, month and a half ago, when the book was released. It stayed with me, and I'm pretty sure this anecdote is going to stay with me for life. So a good way to make a story engaging is to think of that anecdote. And we all have anecdotes. So often people turn around and say, "Oh, I don't have an anecdote, I can't think." Actually, we all have anecdotes. We all are storytellers. We just have to step back and find that little memory plug, which will make that story relatable and authentic, and which will have easy recall for whatever it is that you're trying to say.
Now, Anjana said the key word here, which we've mentioned earlier in this conversation, which is authentic, is once you've found those stories, those anecdotes, and they're the same ones that you sometimes tell your friend. It's the same thing about sometimes you might tell someone, a classmate or a colleague, something that your mother said, or something that happened to you, maybe not in your childhood, but something that really affected your life. Those are the things that people really like to hear. And those are the things that are going to make you an honest and authentic storyteller, and really make a connection with your audience. And that audience can be one person if you're in a job interview, or that audience can be 1,000 people at a huge event. It can be a TED Talk that might eventually reach millions. But it's those stories that are going to make that connection, which is what you want in order to achieve your goal, whether it be just building your personal brand for some larger purpose in the future, or even if it's selling your company's products that way.
And, one of the other tips that we would like to share is, which builds on this, be authentic, is there is a huge appetite for being yourself. the individual is now far more in the forefront than even a decade ago. People like that. People like you to celebrate who you are and in many ways claim your space, to tell the world that you are enough and that this is your story. But also remember that when we tell stories which are genuine, we're always consistent across platforms. Now, whether you're speaking to your employees, whether you're speaking to customers, whether you're speaking to your friends, whether it's students that you're telling stories to, as long as your story is genuine, you will also be consistent. And that is really important because in today's digital world, if you're not consistent and your story is somewhat different, if your audience is, say, your employee, but you tweak that story and lace it with a different set of facts for customers, you will get caught out because everything lives forever on on digital platforms in today's day and age. So whatever your story is, make sure it's a genuine story and that story is the same across platforms, which will be natural, and it will be the natural thing that will happen if you're not making it up. So please don't make stories up just because you want to be a storyteller.
Good point, Anjana. Those are the tips that we had today. Maybe we can, Sukirti, what do you recommend? Shall we take some questions now, or do you have other questions?
Right now, yes, please do put in your questions, but I definitely have many, and I'm sure Mahua does too. A lot of people do get confused when we talk about storytelling, especially in the business setting. How much of your personal life and how much of your personal sphere should you bring in? Because there's always this kind of concern that am I bringing in too much of and should I keep them distinct?
So, I think in the book, we talk about this a bit. There's a lot more in the book, but we do talk about this a bit that, so for example, if you're in LinkedIn and you're talking about the fantastic day that you had in your garden yesterday, the story on LinkedIn, probably the takeaway should really be more about how you enjoyed nurturing your plants. Whereas on Facebook, it could just be about the bloom. So I think the tone of the storytelling changes. Most of us know what our boundaries are for storytelling. How comfortable are we, exposing too much of our private lives? I think that's really a very individual call. And you see this across social media platforms. There are some people who will discuss pretty much everything that's going on in their life. I mean, we sometimes think it's a curated version of their life on social media. And there are others who are just watching, who are not comfortable sharing that much. So how much should you share is really a personal choice. And you'll find out pretty much fairly early on in the game because people respond nowadays. They respond fast through a like, a comment, or a share. So you will know whether there is appetite for what you're doing. But I would say it's a personal choice. Audrey?
I agree. It's stories like why you founded the company, where the idea came from, and with some nice anecdotal details of whether you were, on a meditation retreat, or you were in a music venue, or you were in a coffee shop when the idea came to you. These kind of stories are personal, but they're not intimate. So I'm not saying that should be the line, but there are a lot of places you can draw the line for yourself, and depending on how you feel comfortable. So you still are telling the story of yourself as an entrepreneur, but it doesn't mean you have to share your entire background. But you can also do that, and people are increasingly doing that and finding a receptive audience and making connections that way. So it's personal choice.
I'm going to ask Shankar. He has a question. If he would like to ask it, go ahead. And I have quite a few.
Is this the one that says, as a writer, how do you choose language? So we always say you should keep it simple. We have, we have this test, which is a young, 10-year-old or a 12-year-old should be able to understand what you're writing. or what you've written, and so should an 80-year-old aunt. And just get rid of the jargon. We have a chapter called Death by Jargon in the book. People think that if they use lofty words, that's really impressive. Actually, you use lofty words when you want to probably hide the message or mask the message, or you're not sure yourself. If you're really sure of what your message is, your language will almost always be simple. It will be clean and everyone will be able to understand. So the first rule of writing is to keep it simple, keep it clean, use words that everybody understands, irrespective of who your audience is. Of course, if you're a researcher or a scientist writing for a scientific journal where you have to use certain words, or you're a botanist, you have to use certain words, that's part of the trade. But otherwise, if you're engaging with an audience, keep it simple.
Neelam, go ahead.
Hey, Anjana.
Hi.
I have lots of questions.
Good.
One big question. I'm confused on publishing my untold stories. I have a lot of stories. In 26 years, I've published, not myself, my office has published a lot about me. And the one thing that is not published, I exited. And that's why, as exited out person, they can't publish. And I'm keen to publish my untold story. Tell me what channel.
What is stopping you from publishing your untold story?
I don't know what channel, when to publish and how to publish. I have lots of stories and anecdotes.
So, Audrey, you can jump in later because Audrey is doing another book. So am I. But, so we'll tell you what it is like writers. But the first step always, and, I've actually written some blogs on this in LinkedIn, Writer's Journey. So
Okay.
it's there based on our experience of writing the book. So the first thing is, if you want to write your story, you have to have the discipline to write for half an hour or an hour each day. That's the first thing. And be consistent. It's like my favorite example is the Marmite example. You may love it or you may hate it. But that's all that's there on the breakfast table today. So get down, open your laptop, your computer, or your journal, or whatever it is, and write every day for an hour or half an hour, whatever time you can commit. And some days you will write badly. That's happened to us as well, quite honestly. There's some days where we've written, Audrey knows this, where I've messaged her back saying, oh God, did I really write this? Doesn't it need to be rewritten? I mean, I was all over the place today. And that's fine. That's part of, a writer's journey. You can go back. It is your writing. You can go back and fix it. But you need to have the discipline to write every single day and tell yourself, typically a book is anything upwards of 45,000 words. So tell yourself that you will reach those 45,000 words and you will write 500 words each day. So that's the first step, right?
Okay.
Audrey?
I'm working on a novel right now, so this is something that I'm struggling with, is to get those words down on the page and figure out how to tell the story. And it's the same with memoir, if that's what you're thinking of, writing your own story. And there are lots of ways to do it, and I understand that you're debating. But I think Anjana's right. Is the first thing to do is to get it down, collect everything, and the second thing is to not do it alone. I mentioned earlier that writing this book with Anjana and our colleague Mary Beth, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, was so valuable. We contributed our expertise, and then we edited each other's work and gave each other feedback. Oh, maybe it seems like this is missing. Oh, this is really well written. Don't forget to mention this. Maybe we could phrase this differently. That kind of feedback is so valuable, and it's also validation. If you can find a writing group or one mentor or just a writing partner, someone who's trying to do something similar, to bounce ideas off, to share your writing with, it's really scary. It's scary for me. Every week I'm in 2 or 3 different writing groups, and every week I have to submit to one or the other. And the whole time I'm waiting for them to read my work, even though I'm a published author and I do this for a living. I'm waiting to see what they think. And it's always a positive experience. They like it and they have positive suggestions for improvement. And once you've got a body of work, then you can decide, you can consult with different people to decide, is this a book? Is it a series of blog posts? Is it a podcast? Is it and some other, is it a series of videos? There are lots of different ways to publish what you've got.
Go ahead, Vishali.
Yes. Hi. It's been great so far. The entire webinar has been very useful so far. I have a question. So let's say you're working for a company and they have clients and they want you to take care of their social media accounts, your client's social media accounts. How do you keep it interesting? How do you keep it effective and interesting in a long term, not just one time, in a long term?
So you're asking for an entire strategy, which is actually in the book. But the first thing is you always have to plan at least 6 months to a year in advance.
6 months to a year. Wow.
Yeah, because you need to know what the continuity of your storytelling is. What is the end goal of your storytelling? What is going to happen if you keep sticking with this story? You can't sort of midway change your story and do something else. So I always say, whenever you do plan for 6 months to a year, always make room for responsive events, which might plug back into what your client is doing. A little like the Amul mascot, always responsive to an event, and hence always alive and always fresh. So there is some, in today's world, people expect you to react and respond to things around you. So that is one way to keep the momentum going. Have those little pockets of responsiveness, but have a longer story to tell, which is probably around the values of the brand. What is the value? Is it a trusted brand? What are the stories of trust? Do you have a pipeline of stories for a whole year, which are multi-format, say for Instagram, for social, for Facebook, or wherever your audience resides? It could be that your audience is only on LinkedIn. So do you have a pipeline of stories where, Audrey mentioned a while ago, use people to tell stories? We forget that our biggest resource in a large organization is the manpower. Each individual in that organization has a unique story on how they relate to that organization, or how, let's assume there's that one quality of trust that your organization stands for. What is that employee's story about learning the value of trust in that organization? And so now, if it's a large company and, a mid-sized company with say 100 employees, you've got 100 stories there. So I think you have to start thinking about the resources that you have within the company. We've traditionally looked at resources outside because we've used advertising as a way of communicating, but storytelling forces you to look inside.
Very nice. Pauline is asking if you're not camera friendly. So what's the best way of communicating your story on Instagram?
Oh, just like we're doing it right now.
But you don't like.
I'm in the camera friendly bit. We're doing fine. I think that, this goes back to the point that Audrey was making a while back. Be genuine and be authentic. Instagram is really where people want to see the real you. I mean, of course, it's an aberration that what you see on Instagram has, lights and makeup and all the rest of it that's made to look nice. But there are so many viral posts I've seen, which are just genuinely people doing what they like doing. And there is an audience for that as well. So I think gone are the days where you need, a makeup person and a whole paraphernalia of doing things. If that was the case, there wouldn't be individual influencers on Instagram. The more important thing, yes, of course, Instagram is a visual medium. No one's saying it's not. But the important thing is your story interesting for whoever's watching? Is that short video that you have, is that useful? I mean, say, you're a dietitian. You may not be the best looking dietitian in the world and you don't turn up wearing makeup, but you're telling someone something really useful about gut health and they're interested, they will listen.
So this question always comes back, and I'm coming to you, Amita, you're next, about interesting, because there is so much content and, we're overwhelmed with it. And like what you said, there's more and more content coming every day. How do you make it interesting? Because it's like, how do you get that creativity and get those creative juices flowing?
That goes back to what we've been saying about being authentic, honest, and genuine, and connecting with people as people. A few years back, I had to buy this book just because it was so ridiculous. It was called How to Be Interesting. And I
because I think that's what we struggle with, because every time you're wondering how to be interesting if you're on Instagram or Facebook.
But when you think about it, we're all interesting. So what I did with this book is I took a picture of myself with a big what do you call it? I'm thinking of a word in another language, but a shocked look on my face, like, oh my gosh, this is my latest concern, how to be interesting. But and people loved that post because it was just an Instagram photo of me making fun of the fact that I was trying to be interesting. And I got lots of reassuring comments who said, oh, of course you're interesting. Don't worry about it. If you're telling your real story and you're being your real self, you'll be interesting. If you're talking about products, or you're talking in jargon, or you're talking beyond what your audience can understand and connect with, then you won't be interesting. But it's not that difficult. Just be yourself.
Thank you. Amita, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good evening. And how does a fresher start writing on blogs for the first time? And what about the time? How does one, dedicate the time on this? And is it necessary to tell audience through pics in stories?
Through pictures, you said? Through pictures?
Yes.
So really, it depends on what the medium is. So if you go to, say, a community forum, oftentimes there are no stories, but there's a lot of interesting information. It depends on who your audience is and why they're coming to the location where you're present. Whether you are doing a blog or say you're doing a column or whatever it is that you're doing. So yes, visuals do help you remember stories better. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But it's not to say that if a story doesn't have a visual, people will not read. It's really about what your audience wants and why your audience is there. How do you start writing? It's the same as how do you start driving? How do you start, cycling? You just have to get on with it. And with time, you will gain confidence. You will get better. There will be days where you have a loss of confidence, like we all do every day in everything that we do. And that's fine too. So you will have good days and you will have bad days, like you have in life, you will have in writing. That's what my personal experience is. And but if that's what you want to do, then that's what you must do every day for a bit and see where it goes. And like Audrey said, if you need support, reach out to other writers, writing groups. They impose a certain, I would say they impose a skeleton of discipline on you. Working with Maribeth and Audrey, we would sort of decide between ourselves. So we have to get one chapter done in the next 14 days. And we would sort of set a date. And we would remind each other every 3 or 4 days, are we getting there? Are we getting there? We're not going to miss this deadline. So that's like a skeleton of discipline over me. Like I'm bound by that. And that helped me stay the course.
Thank you. I'm going to come back, but we also have a fantastic storyteller with us, Anuji. If you would love to tell your story, we would also love to hear it. And Durga, I know you've just asked a question. I'm just unmuting you. Go ahead. So Durga says she has a faulty mic. So she says, how do I connect the different facets of my life with storytelling? I've lived pan-India with an army dad, have been an investment banker, married and lived in Japan, studied and taught Japanese, made a career transition to learning and development in my late 30s.
Oh my God, she's had an incredible life journey. I'm sure she's got million stories.
So how do
I
you
agree.
connect them all? Because like what you said, I think that was very interesting, that you need to have a 6-month view. So how does one build this? Because, a lot of people say, what is it that you're trying to project? How does one do that? Do you select 2-3 parts of your personality and say, okay, I'm going to focus on this? Or do you kind of just figure it out? Because honestly, this was my next question also. This like and forwards and, is also devastating, because you do kind of put yourself out there. And when you don't see that response back, it becomes very disappointing.
Well, there is a lot of trial and error involved. Not every post is going to succeed, and it takes a while to get traction on any platform, to keep people coming back and looking at your content. But our book includes tips and tricks for that. How to use hashtags to make sure that your posts reach more people on LinkedIn, for example, or how to participate in campaigns. I think there's a current one on LinkedIn that I like. I think it's called This Was Me. It's women who are posting a picture of themselves as a child and a picture of themselves recently, and telling a little bit, just a post's worth of information of where they came from and where they are now, something that was difficult for them and something that they're proud of. And that's just a really nice storytelling mechanism that's kind of ready-made. And you can, if you do those, even if you don't publish them, if you do them as an exercise, then you can find what is that thread that links through everything that's happened in my life. And I think our viewer who asked the question, I'm sure there's a common thread through everything that you've done. And maybe it's not clear to you, but if you start telling your story even over coffee to a friend, they might pick it out for you and say, oh, it's because you're an adventurer. It's because you're an explorer. It's because you really want to know. Language is the thing that took you from one place to the other. They will help you find that thread. And that can be the overall theme that you base your personal branding on, that you base your storytelling on.
So two areas where we often hear that stories really help. The first, of course, is that elevator pitch. And the same, I would say, is the interview pitch. Any tips for that? Because that's really where you need to grab their attention. You need to grab their attention, by what you're saying and with your words and in a very short span of time. Any tips for those two scenarios?
I think it's really anecdotes. Anecdotes work the best because people remember person stories and anecdotes. And it also gives you an opportunity to present your strongest self. Whether it's for a work interview or, another kind of interaction. You're meeting someone for the first time, you want to suss them out, they want to suss you out, or you want to tell them this is what makes you you. Find an anecdote which amplifies that and make that the center of your storytelling. I think storytelling is a very integral part of an interview process, and it helps you cut to the bottom of who the person is, and it sort of sticks because it's a story. It sticks. It creates a visual memory of who you are and a value memory of what your values are. And that is what causes them, that's what helps people take a call on you or take a decision.
If I can ask a question, in the same regards, given we have so much of information overload, how much is too much? What's the frequency? So at times, there is so much of noise around one particular thing, it kind of holds you back. So as storytellers, what's your tip on how much is too much?
That's a big question. It's also a matter of personal preference, but more importantly, it's a matter of your audience preference. Are you really reaching people if you're posting every day? Do you really need that? Is that where your time is best spent? And those are really strategic questions that that are partly trial and error on particular platforms. I took a course once where we learned how important it is to post on LinkedIn every day. And I didn't do that. I just I just decided I wasn't going to do that, and I'm successful anyway. So, people will tell you this is the rule, and then you're welcome to break it.
And I think,
And I get
Mahua
plenty
is
of engagement.
asking another
Yeah.
question, because sometimes what you feel is that when a person is doing a presentation, they're telling stories, you're like, okay, come on, now get to
Yeah.
the point. Is it like, sometimes you feel, is it a point where it's too overdone?
Absolutely.
The
And I
balance
think that
is important.
comes down to audience as well. I was going to say something about in response to the interview question. If you're in a job interview and you talk about yourself the whole time, then it's a problem. I think that's kind of the problem that you're referring to. You need to make sure you are saying things that are of interest to the audience, that are relevant to the interviewer, and you need to be prepared with questions and to frame what you're saying in terms of the job that you're applying for or the company that you'd like to work for. And those sound contradictory, but it's all one package when you're in a job interview or speaking with a client about what you can do for them. You also need to ask, what do you need from me? What do you need in the market? What are the biggest challenges that your company faces, and how can I help to solve them? Is, for example, a question you can always ask.
Sure, thank you.
So Tanuja is asking, storytelling always excites me. I'm a writer, poetess, and an IT professional. Corporate storytelling is very interesting and I'm passionate about it. This is the second session I am attending about storytelling. Her question is, can one make storytelling as a career?
Yes, a lot of people are doing it, and you can make storytelling into a career.
Ma'am, do we have any career line like storytelling?
Yes, there are professional storytellers, there are professional coaches. I mean, we do storytelling for companies. RB does it. I do it. We help companies tell their stories. So we are actually professional storytellers. There are also, I in fact had a former colleague in television who does professional story. She's a storyteller for children. Parents send their children over on the weekends, and she does these really lovely animated storytelling sessions, interactive storytelling sessions for children. So it is a career. There are firms, I think there is also a company called Anecdote, which just does storytelling for companies and teaches people how to tell stories. So it is definitely a career option.
When I listened to you during the introduction, I was shocked for a minute. Is this a career? Is this a profession? So today is the first day I got to know that there are professional storytellers. So
well, I mean, I don't know, but I would add that maybe a lot of corporate PR professionals are also professional now storytellers.
Yeah, apart from writing as a thing, Tanuja, nowadays we work with a lot of corporates where they ask for storytellers. It's a big, I think, career that's growing. Like many other professions which did not exist in the last 10 years, a lot have come up, a lot of job roles. Digital marketing never existed. So like that, business storytelling as a business, as a profession is really growing now, and there's a lot of demand.
Just out of curiosity, since when is this a career line? Is it past 2-3 years or?
No, I think we've been telling stories for the longest time. This is what we said at the beginning of the session, that we've been communicating through stories for centuries. The stories that you hear of, they're all at your childhood. Aesop's fables, for example, is a book of stories, but it's teaching you something. It's teaching you values and morals, but it's a book of stories. So I think storytelling has always been there. What is different now is that it's been given a name within a structure. Within the corporate structure, people have said, well, advertising doesn't work as much as it used to. Authentic communication and stories do. And so it's probably been given a formal name, but that's what we've been doing for centuries.
I will take that question next. What's the future for storytelling? What's the future of this? Because like you just see it everywhere. Is it going to be taught in business schools? Are we going to have a course on this?
We most certainly hope so. Yeah, and we hope that our book will be part of the curriculum, in fact. But jokes aside, we've actually had and I think we've taken a few sessions for business schools, for students on storytelling. So there is a huge interest and appetite, and it's gone beyond just communication schools. These schools are also very interested because you do storytelling in everyday business situations, right? Whether you're communicating to your employees, whether it's a presentation that you have to make, whether it's, so Amazon has this thing about the memo, right? There is a memo that everyone writes if they go to a meeting with Jeff Bezos. So how do you write a clean memo? That is also part of storytelling. And, there is a technique to it. We've mentioned so many of these techniques in the book. So storytelling is definitely here to stay. We believe that.
So a question had come up, and Amita had asked it, that do you need to be a good writer to be a good storyteller?
Only if your, medium is writing. If your medium is video, maybe you don't need to be a good writer, right? If your Instagram and your medium is just visuals, you don't need to be a good writer. So there's this cool example we have in the book. The most liked thing on Instagram is the picture of an egg.
Most
right?
liked.
Yes, it's just an egg. But there is something about that visual that appealed to so many people. So it really depends on what is the medium of storytelling. So if it's in podcast, it's conversational. Do you need the same kind of writing skill that you would need for a blog? The answer is no. But you would need a different kind of, communication skill.
So Vishali is asking that exactly what kind of tools or skills do we need for storytelling?
I think Anjana's outlined some of them, and it depends on what part of storytelling that you'd like to focus on. Are you someone who's really good at taking pictures or choosing photos? Are you good at designing visuals in Canva? Maybe you'd like to go into documentary filmmaking is also a storytelling profession, or maybe you do like writing and you think blogs are the way, or books are the way that you'd like to tell your story. There are different skills needed for each of those. I think the one that's overarching is an interest in people and connecting with people through what you're telling, whatever format it may be.
So my last question, and Mahua, please, your last question also. You got 1 second to catch their attention. What's that one thing I should do?
Do what comes naturally and instinctively. Say what comes naturally and instinctively. And, I also do want to go back because I don't think I fully answered your last question on the future of storytelling, which is, it is going to be device-led. It is going to be technology-led. So if you look back at what's happened in the last 10 years, the reason there has been this proliferation of mediums is because it's been driven by the device, which has really narrowed the entry barrier for storytelling. So a lot of how we tell stories and how we consume stories is going to be driven by a device. It could be, a lot of AR and VR. It might be a lot more immersive. People are looking for immersive experiences now, especially post-pandemic, because you're not able to step out and have that kind of experience that you did before the pandemic. Recently there was an exhibition in London. It was a Van Gogh exhibition where you could go and be part of the picture. You could sit in his bedroom and get yourself photographed. It was like immersive and was a huge success. So people want to be part of the story increasingly, and a lot of it is going to be pushed by technology and the device.
Mahua, your question.
I think I'll give off my last question. Would love to hear Anu Aga's story. So maybe we'll just have a couple of minutes. We'll hear her story. I think people would love that.
Anu?
Can you unmute me?
Yes,
Yeah,
I am.
thank you. It's difficult to tell your story in 2 minutes.
True.
But I became the chairperson of a corporate which was engineering. And I had no background. I'm a social worker by background. And how did I manage my story? By showing my vulnerability and saying, I don't know. Please help me to understand this. And not feeling ashamed of my lack of knowledge of technology, finance. And that's it. And I would say I have learned that say things or write things to express, not to impress. I think this is a very important lesson I've learned. So thank you.
Thank you, Anu. That was brilliant.
Brilliant closure. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Anjana and Audrey, any last tips before we end for today?
That was so inspiring. I think we should finish with that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And it was great to have you. Thank you, Anuji. Thank you, Anjana. Thank you, Audrey. And thank you, Mahua. It was great to have you all with us today.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.